powerful today, as usual. We know who Zelenskyy is. We know who the Ukrainians are. They're freedom fighters. We know who Putin is. He bombs women and children. The question of the speech this morning was, who are we going to be? We're a superpower, and Zelenskyy challenged us to act like it. Zelenskyy needs more. If it shoots, we should ship it. More S-300s, more Javelins, more drones, more Stingers, more everything. This administration is constantly giving process answers. To follow on Chairman or Ranking Member Rish's comments, the administration talks about this like it's somehow some nerd lawyer discussion, not it's a moral battle between good guys and bad guys, and we need the good guys to win. As that video that was shown this morning, every parent should watch that video, and lots of parents should do the hard work of showing their kids that disgusting video. That's who Vladimir Putin is, and he doesn't stop until he's stopped. And the Ukrainians are fighting not just for their kids, but they're fighting for freedom. And he needs more, and we should give him more. And right now, the administration spends all this time talking process and talking slow and talking maybe we could help the Ukrainians lose a little bit slower. Maybe it could go on longer before they lose. What the administration is going to be telling us, should be telling us, is what their plan is to help the Ukrainians win. If it shoots, we should ship it.
Senator Wicker.
Thank you. Senator Sass is right. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. Not only that, he's a serial war criminal. He killed women and children, innocent women and children, in his own country of Grozny. He killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians in Aleppo. He will continue to kill innocent human beings until he's stopped. And the message today was indeed powerful. President Zelenskyy has risen to the occasion in a way that I don't think our team expected in the Pentagon. He's exceeded all expectations. We're now at the end of the third week of this unprovoked attack on an innocent nation for one reason only. They want to be free. They want to choose their own leadership and their own direction. That is anathema to war criminals like Vladimir Putin. President Zelenskyy asked for a no-fly zone today. He's not been able to make the case to a majority of Americans, both in the civilian community, in the legislative branch, or the defense establishment about that. But what we can do and what we should be able to agree to do is this idea of a humanitarian airlift. Bring the water in to civilians who are dying of thirst in these cities that are being blocked. Bring the food in. Airlift the innocent civilians to keep them from being killed, to keep Vladimir Putin from using civilian deaths to break the will of the Ukrainian people. I am urging the administration to look at this step that is short of a no-fly zone, and let's do everything we can to make sure that the forces of freedom win this one, and that Vladimir Putin, this serial war criminal who's done it over and over again and who will do it again if we don't stop him, that his reign of terror ends at this point.
Thank you. Senator Kennedy.
A couple of observations. Number one, I think President Zelenskyy has managed not only to unite the West, to a large extent, he's managed to unite the Congress. And he truly is, as one commentator put it, an icon of liberty and guts. Number two, I think it's important to recognize when we do things right. I congratulate President Biden on some of his sanctions. I think his sanction on Russia's central bank and, of course, the sanction of our allies was particularly effective. It's not going to put Mr. Putin to his knees economically, but it has hurt him. Point three, unfortunately, I think President Biden has had some Bambi's baby brother moments here. President Zelenskyy has made it very clear that he's not asking for American troops or American planes or American pilots. He's asking for help in terms of winning the war in the air. And whether he needs surface air missiles or planes, we should provide them to him. And there is a way to do that. I know the president is nervous about it. We're all nervous. But I would point out that during the Vietnam War, Russia was not reluctant to provide planes to North Korea. They didn't go through a third party or a fourth party. They said, here they are. During the Korean War, Russia was not reluctant to provide planes to North Korea. So I think there's a precedent for this. And the final point I will make, I'm not going to go into any great length, but I think the president has had a Bambi's baby brother moment in terms of his energy policy. We're not going to win this war militarily or economically without cutting off Putin's cash flow. And he gets his cash flow from oil and gas. And many of our allies have gotten themselves in a position, we'll worry about this later, where they have to buy his oil and gas. And their response to us is, we have to buy his oil and gas because where else are we going to get it? And the answer is the United States. But in order to provide it for them, the president is going to have to reject his energy policy of wind, solar, and pixie dust and agree to an all-of-the-above energy policy of wind, solar, nuclear, and, yes, oil and gas.
Senator.
Thanks, everybody. I think we can all recognize it has been a very emotional day. And I'm a mom and I'm a combat veteran. And the images of war that we saw this morning were particularly heart-wrenching, I think, for so many of us. Truly heart-wrenching. What I took away is that President Zelenskyy really is a fearless leader, and he is extremely inspirational to his people and to the rest of the world. And the definition of leader is someone who inspires others to a common goal or objective for the good of the unit or the organization. At least that's the Army definition. And he truly is inspirational. So Putin thought that he could take Kyiv and install a puppet government instead. And he thought that he could do that in 72 hours. And he is being proven wrong, thanks to President Zelenskyy and the will of the Ukrainian people. So the Ukrainian people, their will remains strong, but what we heard from the president this morning, President Zelenskyy, was that they need more help. They don't need it yesterday, tomorrow. They need it today. And we need to step up, and America must do more. And under President Biden, the United States continues to follow, not lead. This is where we need to regain our prominence in the world and step forward and say we are willing to take prudent risk. We're willing to assume prudent risk. Providing the Ukrainians with the type of lethal aid they need, which, yes, includes MiGs, provides for air superiority, provides for additional surface-to-air missiles. Whatever those means are, this administration should be signaling to President Zelenskyy, we are here to help, and we are here to provide. And by doing so, that will signal to Putin that we are together as NATO allies and partners standing strongly behind Ukraine. So we've seen this in the past. Congress has pushed the president, and of course the media, all of you folks in the media have echoed that. Whenever Congress is pushing, then the media echoes, and then what we have seen recently is that the president will finally give in and act. So Congress must keep pushing this issue, and you, as our friends in the media, need to continue pushing as well. Let's send that signal to Putin that we're behind Ukraine. Let's tell Poland that they can move those MiGs to the Ukrainian pilots. Let's make sure we're backfilling the Poles with their needs in their air fleet. So I'm leading 9 colleagues to Poland and Germany. We are going to see firsthand the humanitarian crisis and the devastation that this war has created. And we will ensure that Ukraine and our NATO partners are getting all of the support that they need. America has to be on the side of freedom. It's who we are. If we're not, the American people will suffer those consequences here at home, one way or another. We know that Putin doesn't stop at the border of Ukraine. Let's protect our homeland, and let's assist those that need help. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. President Zelensky's address this morning was powerful, and it was compelling. The world is inspired by his leadership and inspired by the incredible courage of the Ukrainian people defending their homeland. As we have seen these horrific images of the carnage, of the human life, of the murders Vladimir Putin is carrying out in Ukraine, what is so frustrating is that this was entirely preventable. This war didn't have to happen, the most significant war in Europe since 1945, since the end of World War II. There were 2 specific mistakes made by the White House that caused this war. Number 1, the disastrous retreat and surrender in Afghanistan that emboldened America's enemies. And number 2, tragically, the White House's decision to waive sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and to surrender to Putin, allowing him to complete that pipeline, which was the direct precipitating cause of this invasion. 2 weeks ago, when every member of Congress was on the video conference call with President Zelenskyy, he told all of us, if the United States had sanctioned Nord Stream 2 last year, Putin would not have invaded. It was the White House's political decision to waive those sanctions that caused this invasion. What should we be doing now? 2 things. Number 1, the United States should be providing lethal military aid, far more than we are currently providing. We should be providing Stingers. We should be providing Javelins. We should be providing drones. And most critically, we should be providing fighter jets. President Zelenskyy has said fighter jets are his top priority. It's what he needs most. Poland has offered up the MiGs that the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly, and Joe Biden personally vetoed those MiGs going to Ukraine. President Biden should allow those MiGs to go to Ukraine today. Not flown by American pilots. We should not put American servicemen and women in harm's way, but flown by Ukrainian pilots so that the Ukrainian people can defend their homeland from Putin's aggression. And secondly, we need to take away Putin's revenue from oil and gas. Vladimir Putin is a petro-tyrant. This war is being funded by his sales of oil and gas. Putin believes Europe is addicted to Russian oil and gas. Biden should unleash American production to step in and take European customers away. Our European allies should sign long-term contracts with American oil and gas producers or with our allies and take that revenue away from Putin, defund his war. Biden, unfortunately, does not believe victory is possible. The Biden team is resigned to failure, to Putin's winning. Putin can be defeated, but only if we stand with our Ukrainian allies, we provide them with the weapons they need to defend themselves, and we take away Putin's revenue from oil and gas. That is the path to victory.
There you President Zelenskyy this morning was characteristically inspiring. His words were powerful, and his words were clarifying to this senator. The Ukrainian people have done their part to defend their country, to defend our values, the priority that we've long put on sovereignty. They've done their part to ensure their freedom. They need their partners and allies to do our part. It's clear that this battle, as President Zelenskyy indicated, this battle for Kiev and the larger battle to maintain Ukrainian independence is going to require on dominance of the airspace. Now, we've given lethal assistance to the Ukrainians, most recently in a bipartisan fashion through a $14 billion aid package that provided them additional Javelin anti-tank weapons. It provided their folks on the ground additional Stinger anti-aircraft weapons, but they need more surface-to-air missiles to ensure that they can control the airspace, and the Ukrainian pilots need jet aircraft to fly. There are MiGs, we know, in Poland. There are MiGs that, working with our NATO allies, we can expeditiously transfer to the Ukrainian Army and Air Force and ensure that they have the wherewithal to defend themselves. That's all that President Zelenskyy is asking for. That's all he's asking for. So let's give the Ukrainian people the tools to carry on the fight. We've succeeded in helping Ukraine become a porcupine that's difficult for Vladimir Putin and his army to digest. Let's go to the next step. Let's ensure that they have the teeth to fight back, especially as they launch a counteroffensive from Kiev. We have to stand with the Ukrainian people during their darkest hour. I know that the American people stand with them. I call on President Biden to transfer those jets today.
The Biden administration's timidity in the face of this evil needs to end, and end today. You know, this is like a movie, a bad movie. Unfortunately, our parents and grandparents fought what they believed to be the war to end all wars in World War II. We never dreamed that this holiday from history would end where a megalomaniac like Vladimir Putin, with dreams of restoring the Russian Empire, would do something like this, attack the sovereign people of Ukraine. But there are lessons we can learn also from World War II, when the United States became the arsenal of democracy and provided under the Lend-Lease program the weapons, the ships, the aircraft, everything that Britain needed to hang on during its time of trial during the Blitz. We should do that, and we should not dictate from Washington, D.C. what sort of weapons they can get access to. Where does the Biden administration get off saying, well, we'll give you this but not that, when people are trying to defend their very lives and their national sovereignty against a megalomaniac dictator like Vladimir Putin? We should let them make the decision and to provide them everything they need in order to defend themselves and their country and defeat Vladimir Putin.
Good afternoon, everyone. In many ways, President Zelenskyy is a modern-day Braveheart. His courage and the bravery of the Ukrainian people have inspired all of us. And he challenged Congress today, and he challenged our country that if you want to be a leader of the world, you have to be the leader of peace. The leader of peace. But you can't obtain peace if you're leading from behind. President Reagan said it, President Eisenhower before him, we obtain peace through strength. We need the president, our president, as well as Europe to step up and lead. Right now we have less than 1,000 troops outside of European borders engaged in this, but 102,000 American troops are engaged with this right now. we had the ability to show more compassion, to give more humanitarian aid. And I want to do all those things that are humanly possible. And I look forward to joining Senator Ernst in our trip over to Poland and Germany this week and seeing troops from the Big Red 1, the 1st Infantry Division of Fort Riley, Kansas. And by the way, we're taking some homemade Twinkies for them. There is so much more that we could do. So many things short of boots on the ground and American pilots in the air. We can arm Ukrainians, as my colleagues have talked about, getting their MiG-29s. I think we could get them some of the A-10s that we're going to mothball. We could get those to them as well. I think that they have pilots that could do it. But our sanctions have to be real. Right now, our president is just shouting in the wind that he's not really following through with tough sanctions. And specifically what I'm talking about is the Biden sanctions on financing of Russian energy don't go in effect until June 24th. Now, some people have told me that the Russian economy is 25% energy dependent. Maybe it's 50% energy dependent. It's great that we're going to embargo the oil on its way, but there's so much more we could do short of boots on the ground. Once again, our president is late to act. And I would just promise America this, that, you know, as a physician, I had to give life and death advice every day. I'm not going to make any type of recommendations or decisions based upon emotions. This body behind me has spent hours discussing this issue, and we're going to continue to have Ukrainian first and foremost, but also the safety of our soldiers and of our pilots as well. We'll do what we can to support Ukrainian people and President Zelenskyy. Thank you so much.
America has a special role in this world. Sometimes it's easy to look the other way, but when we do, we often leave the world in a much more difficult and deadly place. And the United States of America needs to do more today than what we've done to date. It's military, it's humanitarian, it's diplomatic. The entire world needs to isolate this thug Putin and his country, Russia. We will have success in answering the call that President Zelenskyy made to the United States in his remarks to Congress this morning if we do the things that now need to be done to give Ukraine a greater fighting chance, not only to survive, but to win. I saw a video from a newscast in which the reporter was questioning a 10 or 11-year-old boy in an orphanage in Ukraine. And the question to this 10-year-old was, what do you want to be when you grow up? Through an interpreter, the 10-year-old said, when I grow up, I want to be an American. Even in today's world in which we see division and political discourse in this country and around the world so challenging, a 10-year-old boy knows the value, the importance of being an American. I want to make certain that a 10-year-old boy tomorrow and a 10-year-old boy from Ukraine the day after tomorrow knows the value of what it is to be an American, and that can only be true. No one would want to be an American unless America does what America does best, and that's protect freedom and liberty for our own citizens, but around the world as well. Let America be the example that it is to that young Ukrainian by us doing the task that's before us. Thank you.
President Zelenskyy is inspiring, and he is a fighter. And President Zelenskyy is a leader, and he is a hero. But his situation is dire. We should be looking at any and all available options that are out there to assist Ukraine. In particular, the more sophisticated anti-air systems to counter that Russian bombing. Some options could include working with our allies to provide the Soviet-era systems that the Ukrainian forces know how to operate. They're familiar with things like the SA-8 and the SA-10, and those can target planes at higher altitudes. Other resources are the counter-drone technology, as well as the anti-tank and anti-air weapons that we've heard my colleagues mention. And why we remain laser-focused on helping Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, I think it is critical for the Biden administration to fundamentally reevaluate their approach to Russia. We've seen past administrations that have overlooked decades of Putin's bad behavior. And they hope that possibly American restraint is going to lead Moscow to take the same approach. Well, what we've seen this month, we know that is a fantasy. That is a fantasy to think that Putin is going to change his behavior. Right now we have the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review before the administration. And I hope, as President Biden reviews those and issues the new ones that he hopes to, that he really looks at the changing security environment that we are facing as a country, that he really takes into account the threats that we face as a nation in this changing environment. And I sincerely hope he will make wise decisions before he makes overreaching changes to those strategies.
Could we have Senator Langford, Senator Hoeven, and Senator Sullivan? Some of us are going to run vote and come back to take your questions. Senator Langford.
I encourage the nation to pray for the people of Ukraine. It's an incredibly difficult season for them. And to be able to hear President Zelenskyy today speak to the American people and speak to the world and to say, do you see what's going on? And to be able to say to America, do you remember 9/11? What he was pulling from us is, remember that moment in 9/11 when you were attacked and you wanted the whole world to come to your aid? Now that's us. We want the whole world to come to our aid. And while we provided anti-tank, anti-aircraft, while we provided them intelligence information, food, water, medical supplies, while we continue to be able to stand alongside of them, they continue to say, do you see what's going on? Will you help us? In a real biblical sense, there's a biblical term that says if it's within your power to act and you withhold it. That's really what he was calling out, is to say, you have access to aircraft that we could use. That's what we need to defend ourselves. You have access to S-300 anti-aircraft systems. You have access to those, and you're withholding them. Don't withhold. Don't hold back from doing good when you have the opportunity to do it. You could hear President Zelenskyy clearly say it towards the end of his message to everyone, is to say to President Biden, don't just be the leader of America, be the leader of the world, be a leader for peace. Provide what is needed to actually provide peace. That's not an unreasonable request from a person who's taken inbound 1,000 missiles in the last 3 weeks. For those of us that have been to Ukraine, to see that video and to see those places that we recognize, and then to see the side-by-side of what they look like now versus what they look like just 4 weeks ago was stark. So the simple, clear statements from President Zelenskyy that I would reiterate today that I've repeated to people over and over again. Find a practical way to be able to help. There's a lot of aid organizations out there that would love to have Americans jump in to be able to help them personally. Find practical ways to be able to help. Our government, our nation needs to continue to be able to step up, and what is within our power to do good, we should do good, to be able to step alongside and to be able to help people. President Zelenskyy was calling on American companies to stop selling products to Russia and to stop buying Russian products, to put additional pressure on them. I think it's a reasonable thing to do. As President Zelenskyy said, peace is more important than income. And for any American company that's saying they're going to continue to be able to sell luxury products to Russia, they're choosing income over peace. So I would call on companies, even in my state or anywhere they may be in the United States or around the world, to be able to pull back income from Russia to allow them to feel the effects of what they're doing to their neighbors around them and for us to stop trying to punish Russia for killing civilians and to actually start protecting civilians' lives.
Senator Hogan.
President Zelensky's presentation this morning was moving and powerful. You saw it. And I particularly thought that video he showed was incredibly powerful and heartbreaking. I've been to the Ukraine. And you saw those cities and the color and the beauty of those cities, and then you saw the devastation. You saw people being killed, men, women, and children. Heartbreaking. President Zelensky asked for lethal aid. We need to provide that. He laid out a number of things that we can do, certainly the MiG aircraft, the missile defense systems. We're looking at the drones, obviously the Stingers, the Javelins that we're providing now. We need to provide that lethal aid. That's very clear. We need to give the Ukrainian people the tools to carry on the fight that they are conducting so valiantly, amazingly. No question about it. And then the sanctions. He talked about the sanctions. We need to fully implement the sanctions. We've said that from the start. We've said that before Putin invaded. We said fully implement sanctions. Put the hammer down on what Russia's doing. Stop their ability to fund their war machine by selling oil and gas. And then I would add, we've got to produce more oil and gas, more energy in this country, not only to fight back against inflation to help our citizens, but so that we can provide energy to Europe, help our allies, and help cut off Russia's funding for their war machine through their sales of oil and gas. And that comes down to the sanctions and us producing more energy. The Biden administration needs to take the handcuffs off our energy producers. We can produce a lot more oil and gas, and we need to do it. A number of years ago, I sponsored a bill. We moved it through the Senate and the House to build the Keystone Pipeline. Had President Obama not vetoed it, that's almost 1 million barrels a day that would be coming into the United States from Canada. Let's learn from that. What's going on? What's going on with these restrictions on our ability to produce oil and gas? The Biden administration needs to change that right now.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Rob, for putting this press conference together. I think we all saw the very powerful and moving speech today from President Zelenskyy. From my perspective, one thing that we need to do, all of us, including the Biden administration, is I think this speech should be a call to changing the paradigm under which the administration and, to be honest, the whole U.S. government has been operating. Let me explain that a little bit more. Our intel community, I think they did a fantastic job in the run-up to this barbaric invasion. We were getting briefs about what was likely, what was very likely, what course of action Putin was going to be taking with his military. All turned out to be very accurate. They did a great job. Once the conflict began, though, we and the administration have been getting briefs essentially with the conclusion that they're going to be defeated. That's what we have been getting. I'm assuming that's what the president has been getting. It's usually about how many days it's going to be until they're crushed. And when that is the assumption under which policy is being made, it limits the very options that you consider. To me, one of the most important elements of the speech today is there has to be a new paradigm under which the administration is operating, and it needs to be this. The Ukrainians could win. Is it likely? Maybe not likely, but is it possible? Yes, it's possible. And trust me, the briefs that we have been getting as senators, and I'm assuming the executive branch as well, until very recently, have discounted that almost to zero. We need to change that. We need to put together a winning formula, and you've heard what it is here. It's more lethal weapons, it's tighter sanctions, it's intel sharing, it's energy to our allies, and it needs to be done quickly. But the paradigm needs to shift too. We can start talking about the possibility of them winning, and I think that matters more than anything.
Very, very well said. I'm going to anticipate a question, if that's okay, which is going to be, well, how can you guys tighten the sanctions? How can you get the planes to Ukraine? The administration is going to oppose these things. And let me just give you a sense of why we're optimistic about changing the opinion of the administration on how tough to be here against Russia. And I have 5 reasons. One is the inability for the United States to send Stinger missiles from the United States. That was the administration's position at one point. Another would be the SWIFT sanctions. Remember, they were against putting sanctions on banks through the SWIFT international banking system. Third would be stopping Nord Stream 2. The administration was against it. In fact, they exercised the waiver to be able to continue Nord Stream 2 instead of sanctioning it as it had been. Revoking PNTR, that's the issue of trade. Why should they get access to our market? It's a privilege, not a right. They were against it. The oil ban. Recall the administration was against this ban on oil. This is Russian oil that was providing the Russian government and the war machine of Vladimir Putin $40 to $50 million a day. In every one of those cases, the administration moved from being against these things to being for them. So I think we've had an impact, and we need to continue to push what we think is the best policy to try to save Ukraine. I agree with what Senator Sullivan just said. If you talk to the Ukrainians, as I did last weekend at the border, refugees coming across, you see the worst of humanity and the best of humanity. The worst of humanity is these images we saw today when President Zelenskyy showed us the video, and we see on our TVs and our online constantly. But we also saw the best of humanity in refugees helping one another, and refugees with an incredibly traumatic, sad story, but also hope and confidence that liberty will win out. But they want our help. Of the probably 24 refugee families I talked to, all but a couple said basically the same thing, which is cover the skies. Help us. Help us protect us from these bombardments coming from the air. So I think we need to continue to push the administration, tightening the sanctions, ensuring that we're providing the lethal weapons they need to actually protect themselves, defend themselves, give them a fighting chance. Questions? Yeah.
Senator Portman, I wanted to ask you about PNTR. Where is the gap between the two parties on getting that bill done? And also, fertilizer is one of Russia's biggest exports, but it has a zero tariff even under column 2. Do you think that the tariffs on fertilizer should be raised, or is that too much of a problem for inflation for food for the world?
Yeah, first of all, I talked to Senator Crapo yesterday about this, and we're moving forward with the House, as you know, on legislation. I will say, again, the administration has had 2 positions on this. Now they're for it. Before they were against it. With regard to products that would have no tariff even without permanent trade relationship or most favored nation, we need to look at that. I've said specifically that there are some items that, we ought to look at increasing tariffs on, as we have in other cases, as we have with China over the past several years. But meanwhile, my hope is we can pass legislation to cut off most favored nation treatment for a country that does not deserve that favor. Yes.
You mentioned a bunch of actions that Congress has encouraged, pushed the Biden administration towards that they were reluctant to do. Along the way, the Biden administration has repeatedly said that it was important. One of the reasons they were maybe moving more slowly was because they needed to bring their European partners along. You were just in Poland. I'm wondering what you heard from the Poles, if anything, about the MiG situation, because the Pentagon says it is, not tenable, that situation with having the MiGs in Ramstein. I wonder if you understand what Germany's feelings are about this. Again, it is sort of a complicated situation that involves our European allies, and just wondering if you could shed any light on what their position is and how you guys can't tell Poland or Germany what to do. You can't legislate that. You can push Biden, but where does this sort of European diplomacy situation come in?
Acknowledging that this is an issue, I will just suggest that America needs to lead. Let me give you a specific example. It wasn't talked about today, I don't think, but we've talked about it in the past, and I continue to raise it. We should be seizing, not freezing, the assets of oligarchs and other officials at the Kremlin and providing those funds, those proceeds, to the refugees for humanitarian aid. France has already done that. Germany has already done that. Why should the United States be leading from behind here? We should be leading in the front. So there are examples where we should be leading our friends in the EU, and particularly the NATO allies. With regard to the MiGs, Poles are a sovereign, independent country. They can make their own decision, and they have. They want to provide them. They'd like to do it, through us, in part for reasons that we probably shouldn't talk about in this setting. But it's important that we listen to the Poles. They want to not just help the Ukrainians be able to defend themselves in the skies, but they also want to upgrade their own Air Force, which is in our interest. They already fly our best aircraft, and that's good. We want them to do that. But we also want to be sure the Ukrainians get the help they need. So it's a win-win-win. It's us bolstering the defenses of Poland. We just sent another 5,000 troops there. We now have 10,000 there. They have F-16s already. They want the upgraded model. We should help them to do that. That's in our interest. Maybe we could have fewer troops there if they had a better air defense system.
Germany's okay with with Ukrainians flying those planes out of a U.S. air base in their airspace?
Well, you'd have to ask Germany that, but again, I mentioned earlier the word creative on purpose, because we need to be creative right now. This is a matter of hours and days, not a matter of weeks and months. And, typically our procurement system moves very slowly. We cannot permit that to happen in this case. We can't afford it. Senator Rich.
I've been doing this a long time.
Sure.
And for the first time ever, I'm hearing from our European allies, NATO countries, America, toughen up. First time ever.
No, and I think it's just a really important point. The idea is that Congress, and by the way, most of those things that Rob just talked about, where we've been pressing the administration on, is very bipartisan. Very bipartisan. There's a bunch of Republicans here, but on every single one of those issues, it was Democrats and Republicans pushing the administration. But the other issue is, on a number of these topics, the Europeans have been pushing the administration as well, not just the Congress. So it goes to this issue of leading. They want us to lead, but on a number of these issues, they're telling us, the Biden administration, to do more as well. So it's Democrats, Republicans, and the Congress, and a number of our key European allies.
Can you go into maybe more granular detail about maybe before or after Zelensky's address, what he specifically outlined? I know there was a list that was sent to lawmakers and to the Biden administration. Can you talk a little bit about what those specific air defense items are, and do they include Switchblade drones?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specific list because that's a confidential issue, as I understand it. It may even be classified. But what he said in the speech is consistent with what they have said to us consistently, which is this. They're looking for Warsaw Pact country air defense systems that they know how to operate. And that does include what they already have, the S-300. They know how to use it. They're using it all the time. But they need it to be re-weaponed as well. In other words, at some point, you run out of missiles. There's another system that was talked about a little bit today. It's the SA-3, the SA-8, which are systems that are also very effective, that a number of these countries have. And by the way, this ranges all the way from Greece, up to Poland and even into the Baltics. So there are a number of countries that have these systems. So he's looking for help with regard to us providing the facilitation of this. In some cases, in my view, we should be purchasing these systems if those countries are reluctant to sell them, and then providing them. And right now we have the ability to do it. The corridors are open right now for the most part. They may not be shortly. And then, of course, the airplanes. We've talked about that a lot, the MiG-29s and their 29 airplanes he'd love to have. And by the way, they only had 37 in their fleet to start with here. This would be a huge increase for them. And their pilots can fly them. They know how to fly them. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we should be providing yesterday. They need them urgently. Any other comments?
I just have a question following up what you said. What is the strategy right now for trying to pressure the Biden administration to change its posture? Yeah. And are you guys working on any bipartisan resolutions or anything to put pressure on?
Well, I would strongly encourage, and I didn't mean to be critical of our intel community, our military community, but it is a fact that we have been getting briefs since the war began that was, I would say, 100% saying they're going to lose, they're going to be defeated. Here's the timeline. Here's what's, and so that impacts the way in which this administration thinks through options. If you think that the Ukrainians are going to lose and Russia's going to be controlling the nation, it limits the way in which you even contemplate what your next step should be. And again, the intel military community, I think, did a great job on the lead up. They're probably not correct on this assumption. And so this needs to, you should ask the administration. I assume the president's been getting the same briefs we have been. We need to change the paradigm. If the paradigm is, hey, there's a chance that they can win, might not be a huge chance, but we have never even been briefed on that. I think you're seeing that it could happen. And if that is the new thinking, which it should be, then it opens up all kinds of options that this administration should be contemplating, because it's a very different approach when you think you can be supporting someone that can actually win. And to me, the number one issue, and we don't need a resolution on it, we all agree on it, is speed. Is speed on everything, particularly getting lethal weapons to them. The Pentagon, great professionals, but their drawdown, tranche, interagency approach to what we should send or not, it's not working. Speed is what we need.
You know, Zelenskyy thinks he can win, and he's betting his life on it.
Are you guys, like, any of your staff or any of you guys working to try to ask the intel community to kind of look at those different options? Are you engaging in any of those discussions?
So I think all of us are, and what is missing is presidential leadership. President Biden believes Putin's victory is inevitable, and that is reflected in every briefing we get, and it's reflected in the strategy the administration is implementing. You know, I'm reminded in the Cold War when President Reagan was asked, what's your strategy in the Cold War? And he said, it's very simple. We win, they lose. That clarity directed our economic policy, our military policy, our diplomatic policy. We need that clarity to defeat Putin. Right now, the Biden administration is trying to manage the decline of Ukraine, is trying to manage Ukraine losing. It's why the 5 items that Senator Portman listed, every one of them, the administration dragged their feet. Every one of them, Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, had to pull them to doing. It's why the administration is dragging their feet on providing MiGs. If you actually view the Ukrainians as fighting to save their country and having a chance to defeat Putin, then you'd provide the MiGs, and you'd do it today. It's why on energy, this administration is not focused on defeating Putin. If you want to defeat Putin, you rob him of the revenue to fund his war machine, and also, if the remnants of the KGB and the Russian oligarchs see longtime European customers canceling their Russian contracts and signing long-term contracts with American oil and gas producers and with the producers in our allied countries, nothing will put greater pressure on Putin to either give up or to be thrown out of power. That's how you win, but none of it happens without a president who believes victory is possible.
About half of Republicans voted against the omnibus last week. How do you reconcile that with the calls for more military aid, given that the omnibus included about $14 billion to Ukraine?
Well, the omnibus was a Christmas tree filled with massive spending completely unrelated to Ukraine, and many of us pressed for a freestanding vote on Ukraine aid, in particular military aid. I think that would have passed overwhelmingly, if not 100-0, very close to 100-0. The administration played games by sticking Ukraine aid on top of $1 trillion+ of unrelated spending.
One was emergency supplemental, one was an omnibus, and they're actually different bills.
Senator Ford.
Yeah.
So lots of your colleagues saying swift action, more leadership from the administration, but no U.S. troop involvement. Ukraine sets up the no-fly zone, but we keep our distance from that. No matter how creative you get, what if Putin says you're providing material support to your enemy combatants, the U.S. is now in this, opening herself up to cyber attacks, you're hitting me on economic sanctions, it's us against you now. Is that acceptable?
He said we're at war with the United States when we put the sanctions on.
So do you think we're at war with Russia?
We're certainly not at war with Russia. He thinks we are, but there's certainly actions that we're taking.
So everything we have done, Putin has objected to, specifically said that the sanctions are an act of war. But with regard to the stingers, remember, they had basically the same reaction. This means that you're in the fight. So this notion that providing additional lethal weaponry, which we've already been providing, is escalatory, I just don't buy it. I mean, look, I think it's very difficult to say that the Russians are not escalating every single day. I mean, look what they're doing. If you saw that video today, you can see they have now purposely targeted not just civilian targets, but hospitals and daycare centers. And in one case, a maternity hospital. The woman who you saw on the stretcher, the pregnant woman leaving that maternity hospital, we found out yesterday that she and her baby are both dead. So he's escalated constantly as he has been frustrated on the ground because of the brave Ukrainian response, which frankly he'd never expected. He's gone increasingly toward a murderous approach where he is literally killing innocent civilians, girls and boys and men and women and grandparents, in order to try to bludgeon them into submission. If that's not escalatory, I don't know what is. So he continues to escalate, and yet in the West there seems to be the sense, well, gosh, if we even provide one more weapon on top of the ones we've already provided, somehow that's escalatory. I mean, Stinger missiles are taking down Russian airplanes with Russian pilots in them already. What we're talking about is just giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves. None of these are offensive weapons. None of them. Ukraine has no offensive desires. Ukraine just wants to defend itself. I think the only line that perhaps you could suggest was more escalatory is if we started bombing Russia. That would be offensive. That's not what's happening. The Ukrainians are just trying to protect their own country, a territory that is independent and sovereign. So I think the examples were used earlier of, what happened in Vietnam and the Russians providing weapons. I mean, I would take you to Kuwait. Kuwait was not a NATO country. Was that escalatory? I mean, I think, I'm not suggesting that we put boots on the ground. But what I am suggesting is that we do everything we can possibly do short of that in order to protect a sovereign country that is a great ally of ours that chose 8 years ago to turn to us, to turn to freedom. They rejected tyranny for democracy. They embraced the rule of law instead of corruption. They did everything you would want to have happen at a time in the world where increasingly people are living under tyrannical, authoritarian regimes. Ukraine went the other way. And we owe it to them to be there at their side. By the way, we also signed the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994 that said we were going to protect them. They were asked to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for guarantees of protection by the UK, by the United States of America, and by Russia. And here we are today. We didn't keep our end of the bargain. Certainly Russia didn't keep their end of the bargain.
Should there be another package for Ukraine? Are you guys working on anything like that?
Well, we should continue providing, and we should provide far more lethal military aid. And it's important to underscore why, what the American interest is in defeating Putin and preventing Russia from conquering Ukraine. There are some that have made abstract appeals to defending democracy, defending international norms. I don't think that's the job of the American military. I don't think that's the focus of American foreign policy. What the focus of American foreign policy is and should be is defending the vital national security interest of the United States. And the reason we have an interest in stopping Putin is Putin has been very clear about his ambitions. He wants to reassemble the old Soviet Union, and indeed the speech he gave a few weeks ago, nearly an hour long, is positively bone-chilling, in which he laid out that he wants to reassemble the Russian Empire of 1922, which in addition to justifying invading Ukraine, also justifies invading Poland, also justifies invading Finland. In that speech, he describes how he considers Stalin to have been too weak and too lenient. Stalin is one of the worst mass murderers to have ever lived. Stalin's gulags murdered millions, and Putin is saying he wasn't tough enough. It is in America's national security interest for Russia to lose because we don't want Putin to be stronger and to take a major step towards reassembling the Soviet Union, towards threatening Americans, towards threatening our allies in Europe. That's why we want Putin to lose, and we need a clarity and focus in our foreign policy on defeating Vladimir Putin.
Yes. Earlier today, Senator Lindsey Graham reiterated his call for the Russian people to rise up and assassinate Vladimir Putin. I'm wondering if that's a call that the three of you are willing to stand behind as well, and why?
You'd want to direct that question to Lindsey. Look, what's going on here is between the Ukrainian people and Putin. The Russian people run their own country. They've got to make those decisions. We don't need to be telling them what they need to do. They know what's going on here. And every country elects or allows an administration or a government to govern. They've got what they've got. It's up to them.
Let me just add a little something to that I feel very strongly about. These are their neighbors. There are many family ties between Ukraine and Russia. These Russian officers, these Russian officials in Moscow are making a deliberate decision to kill innocent civilians in a peaceful neighboring country, again, where there are many connections and many bonds. There are war crimes being committed. We saw some today in these images. The world is watching. These war crimes will be prosecuted at some point. So I would urge these officials in Moscow and these commanders in the field to think carefully about the decisions they're making and to think about whether they should be refusing orders to kill innocent civilians in their neighboring country that want nothing more than peace. So I hope that somehow this message can be communicated to those who are making these decisions that are causing this mass devastation and killing so many innocent civilians.
Senator Portman, what do you hope President Biden accomplishes when he goes to NATO next week?
I don't want to dominate here. Well, first of all, I'm glad he's going to NATO, and I hope he will actually go to some of the frontline countries, not just to Brussels, because I think he needs to feel it and see it and talk to the refugees. And, you know, I think, having just been to Poland, it is incredibly powerful to hear from these people directly, all of whom wanted to stay in their homeland, all of whom want to go back to their homeland, none of whom want to be leaving their loved ones at home, because in almost every case it was women and children, grandmothers and grandchildren, and the men have stayed behind to fight. So it's heartbreaking. So I hope he will go not just to Brussels and talk to the EU and, you know, be in a nice office building, but actually go to some of these frontline countries. And he probably will. I hope he does. The message ought to be that America is leading. You know, we thank our NATO allies for what they have done, but we obviously need to do more. And we're at a crucial point in this war. If we don't step up and do more, as a group, including, as I said, many of these countries that are former Warsaw Pact countries that have the weapons that Ukraine can use immediately, then we will have failed. So I hope he leads and lets people know that the United States of America stands with Ukraine and that we will do everything possible, and we want and expect the NATO allies to do it with us. Second, energy. This is a very difficult discussion because, let's face it, they're a lot more dependent on Russian oil and gas than we are. But they have to make a decision. Are you for tyranny? Because that's basically what you're saying if you are going to continue to be dependent on Russian oil and gas. He uses it as a political weapon. Always has. Talk to the people of Moldova or Ukraine or Germany for that matter. And this is a tough issue. I get it. I agree that we should be providing more of our energy to the Europeans to substitute for some of this. But there are other countries that are willing to as well. Qatar, as you know, has made that offer. Others have. So that's another part of the message here, is that we should not be fueling the war machine by giving Vladimir Putin all this revenue. It's his number one export, remember. It's the primary way in which he developed this foreign reserve that he thought he was going to be able to access, that luckily, because of sanctions, much of it is now off limits. It's oil and gas. And that discussion needs to happen in a honest, serious way during these meetings with NATO.
President Zelenskyy ended his address to Congress by calling on President Biden to step up and be the leader of the free world. This is an opportunity now for presidential leadership. The world is desperately crying for presidential leadership. And I hope when President Biden goes to NATO, he, number one, lays out a vision that victory is possible, that hope is possible. If you look in the darkest days of World War II, Churchill's vision of victory and vision of hope made it a reality. But secondly, as Senator Portman just emphasized, energy. President Biden should go to the members of NATO and urge every one of them to cancel every contract they have for Russian oil and gas and to replace it with an alternative source. And one thing President Biden could do today to facilitate that is there are 6 applications pending with the Biden administration to export liquid natural gas. Liquid natural gas that can take the place of Russian natural gas. The Biden administration should approve all 6 of them today. Should urge NATO, we can win, Russia can lose, and let's stand together to defeat Russia. That's what President Zelenskyy is desperately calling on this administration to provide.
Briefly. Thank you. Look, what I hope he does is I hope he listens. All of us listen to our counterparts and administrations of our NATO allies. And they're telling us one thing. They are desperate for American leadership. Desperate for American leadership. Zelenskyy said that. You heard him say that. I can tell you, dealing daily with our European allies, they want us to lead. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all very much.
We didn't get enough.
No, never enough.
How
are you doing? Good.
Thank you, God.
To handle spouts and spats between children into these schools to where we can see the outcome being a knee placed on a young child's neck. The focus needs to be de-escalation. Chokeholds need to remain banned across the state for any reason. They should not be prioritized by state legislators and lawmakers. And we challenge those GOP state legislators and anybody who has supported their legislation. Why are they not speaking out on these instances? Why are they disregarding these instances? And with that, I'll yield to the next speaker.
Thank you, Von Mays. Now we will have Femi Akamaladin with the Poor People's Campaign, who will discuss statistics and data.
In the book, Invisible No More, Andrea J. Ritchie says, quote, "I got the message. The police are not here to protect me. They are just as likely as anyone else to commit violence against me," end quote. Neighbor, how are you? Neighbor, how are the children? Neighbor, how are the youth? It is a very genuine question. It is a question of concern and desire for your welfare. For all of us behind me, we are not okay. We are not okay because a little girl is not okay. She is not okay after encountering police violence. As someone on behalf of the Wisconsin Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, we understand very clearly that there are 140 million poor and low-wage workers within this nation. That number has reached 150 million due to this pandemic. In Wisconsin alone, there is 2 million or 35% of the population who are poor or low wage. And of that 2 million, 1.4 million are white. I say that to say that we are all tied together. We all have a common interest in this matter of police brutality and violence against the poor. In our particular situation today, as it relates to children, 49% of our children are living in poor